Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. As part of the creative team over at the ScrapHappy community, the team is talking about various design concepts for our layouts, and this month around we're talking about shelf design. So instead of doing a layout process video, I'm going to walk you through a couple of my layouts where I do a shelf design and tell you what's working and what's not. And I have a couple of small techniques to share, so let's dive into this. I have printed out two photos of shelves that are actually in my scrap space. This one is straight across from me, so I look at it when I'm working. And we're going to talk about each of these as we go. So with this first one here, I have some very sparse shelves, and there's two of those shelves actually, and they're kind of offset from each other. So that is what I'm going to recreate. And I'm actually going to build shelves with paper. I have this piece of paper that looks like a wallpaper, and that will be my background. And then I will use that wood grain to actually build a shelf on my layout. Shelf design is often a horizontal element, a very solid element on your layout that holds up most of the other elements. Now, you can have some dangling elements, you can have some other elements around these items, but for the most part, you have these horizontal, and they're pretty solid horizontal visual elements that will hold up the rest of the layout. And shelves, and depending on if you have a bookcase or like I do where I have floating shelves on my wall, they can tend to have a little bit of a floating feel, which we tend to avoid in scrapbook design. But by choosing your kind of shelf elements and your materials and your colors and textures and things like that, proportions, all of those elements will play into getting that shelf to be solid enough to hold up everything without feeling like it's floating. And in this case, I am actually building my shelf so that it looks like it's a shelf anchored to a wall with those little pegs down there at the bottom. And I have photos of plants because I love these indoor plants that we got last year, and they've been a good plant for me because I'm not always great at taking care of the indoor plants. At any rate, while my plant-themed photos here are very logical to go with a shelf, remember that it doesn't have to be about plants. You can use this style of layout for any topic where you want to display things that you have to share. So that is the reason behind using a shelf design, is that it brings in a different focal to displaying your elements on your page. Now I am going to give these shelves a little bit more dimension by popping them on foam adhesive, and I will leave the little pegs that are holding up the shelves flat so that it adds that dimension. All right, so I've got this layout mostly done. I'm going to do one last embellishment here, and this is just one of those little techniques that I wanted to share for hanging these items over here. And this works very well with the literal shelf design, because now these items look like they're hanging on the wall behind the shelves or along with the shelves. So I just poke a hole, put a brad through my layout, and then here you'll see me sandwiching some twine in between layers of these decorative elements. And I will glue that all down, and then I can hang that element onto my brad and then glue it into place so it won't shift around. All right, as you watch me finish this up, leave me a comment if you like this style of video. I'm not sure I want to do more of these, but if there's enough of you out there who like this kind of idea, let me know and I'll see what I can work in the future. So I wanted to say a couple more things. So this was directly inspired by a physical shelf in my room, so you can do that on your own layouts. And that shelf in particular was very light and bright and airy, so I tried to keep that feel on my layout as well. And this is how it turned out, and I'm very happy with it. So let's go ahead and move on to a slightly different shelf style, which will be inspired by this other shelf, which is off to my right in my scrapbooking space. And this is, I'm in a basement, so this is an old fireplace in the basement of this older house. And this shelf definitely has a lot more stuff going on. There's a lot of busy background, there's a heavy textured background, there's a lot of things on the shelf. So let's go ahead and recreate that. So I am starting off this layout with actually framing my photos with some wood grain paper, same wood grain paper. I have a white mat around my photo that gives me just a small edge, and I've cut these strips of wood grain paper to a 1/2 inch, I believe, and on the upper and bottom halves, I have clipped off the corners at 1/2 inch. So I put a little tick mark, and I've cut from the corner, adjusted my scissors so that it matches up with that tick mark, and sliced off the rest. Now, the other sides, I've cut a little bit longer than what the total length of photo plus frame is gonna be so that I have some excess to work with to get it just right. The reason that I have the mat behind the photo is that it gives me a nice little edge to glue my frame pieces to, and they will butt up nicely with the photo and leave a nice clean look. All right, in order to get to the other frames with those angled edges, those mitered corners, I am going to just glue the piece straight down, and then I'm gonna flip this over, and from the back side, I am going to trim that straight edge to the same angle as what is already there, and that gets them to match up nicely. Now, you could also leave both of these strips with flat edges and then just trim a diagonal onto both pieces at the same time, and I've done that in the past. So there's just a couple of different ways to approach that. All right, so that was a little technique for you, which you can use whether or not you're doing a shelf design. So let's move on to the actual shelf itself. I am going to use washi tape to be my shelf foundation. Now, last time I went very, very literal with the idea of a shelf, but it doesn't have to be that literal. Like I said, any strong horizontal elements that can clump together, it could be strips of pattern paper, it could be one block of pattern paper, it could be a row of brads or buttons or something like that. So anything that has enough weight to it to hold up everything else visually will do. Now, one thing that I like about shelf design is that the shelf doesn't go edge to edge, and that tends to be true in a room where you don't have a bookshelf or even a floating shelf taking up the entire space. So the layout that I'm doing here feels a little too full in the width of the design to me. I would ideally have printed these photos a little bit smaller and kind of shrunk that whole shelf down just a little bit more. That being said, we all know that life isn't perfect, so I'm going to move on with this design. All right, as I show you the final embellished layout, I wanted to highlight some details from that inspiration photo. My shelf itself was a hanging shelf, which maybe you didn't notice as well. So I hung some buntings off the bottom of my shelf. So that is definitely something that you can do with your shelves, maybe hanging a journaling tag or something like that off the bottom. I have made my shelf very full of stuff, which that photo was much fuller than the first layout I did. I incorporated some of those circular elements from the items behind the shelf on my photo, and that plays into the circular floral elements. So I encourage you to go to your home and take a photo of a shelf that is in your house and see what the elements are there that can lead you into a layout design. And if you want to learn more about shelf design, I encourage you to go check out the ScrapHappy blog, where the team is sharing their ideas as well. I will be back on Friday, and until then, have an artful day.